All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I apologize for the delay. We are ready to get started this afternoon, and we will start with Ms. Fry's cross-examination questions from Mr. Lawrence. And just a reminder, Ms. Fry, you will have an opportunity to testify when we get to your phase of the hearing. So this is your opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Lawrence, and then you later, when you're testifying, you can make statements. So please proceed with your questions of Mr. Lawrence.
There we go. Is Mr. Lawrence on?
Mr. Lawrence is ready.
Okay, great. Can I have a BTB10 on page 4?
Okay, we will put that up on the screen.
And line 12.
Okay, what is your question?
Okay. Line 12, it talks about the special use permit from 1978. Can I please have a story of stuff exhibit 162?
Objection.
What's your
It seems that Ms. Fry was just testifying to what the substance of the written testimony is and is now switching to a different document.
Okay, so Ms. Fry, I'm going to help.
I was just.
Wait, Miss. When I'm talking, please let me finish, okay? What I was going to say is I think I can help out here. Let's just read the sentence. I will read it out loud for Mr. Lawrence to establish some context, and then we can go to the other exhibit. The sentence starting on at the end of line 10 states, all of this work was performed under the guidance of SBNF personnel in accordance with the terms and conditions of BTB's SUP issued in 1978. Ms. Fry, is that the sentence you want to ask Mr. Lawrence about?
Right. And then
Okay,
I want to ask.
Now, do you want us to put up another exhibit?
Yes, SOS 162.
Okay, so now we will post SOS 162, and just that's one step at a time. So let's get that posted, and then you may ask your question. Okay, we now have SOS 162, so you may ask your question.
Is this the permit, special use permit that you're referring to in your testimony, page 4, line 12?
I believe this is the original permit, and there was a supplemental to this in 1978.
And I object. Can we at least scroll through the document? We are all looking at a half of one page and making affirmative representations.
All right. Well, Mr. Lawrence seemed to recognize it, but let's scroll down and see if the first page helps.
Well, I'll represent. I don't think that all of the parties have reviewed in the entirety the document that's been identified as SOS 162. As we represented to Mr. Lilly, a ton of documents were submitted. So I'd request that any new documents, we at least scroll through the entirety to make sure that the page is following the first page.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Grady. Mr. Lawrence identified this as the original special use permit, and he said it was supplemented in 1978. If we need to, we can scroll to specific pages and zoom in on them. Ms. Fry, what is your next question?
I object, and I'm not trying
Wait, stop. There's no question out now. What is your objection?
I respectfully, Mr. Lilly, I object to your statement that you said what Mr. Lawrence testified to. Ms. Fry, and I'm not trying to be rude, but I would like a fair and clean record here. Ms. Fry asked him about the half of one page was visible, and then you said that he testified this is what it is.
All right, we will let the record speak for itself as to what Mr. Lawrence said. I apologize if I misstated his testimony. I certainly did not intend to. Ms. Fry, you may proceed with your question.
After seeing the entire document, is this the special use permit that you referred to in line 12 of page 4 of your testimony?
It appears to be.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right. All right, so that takes care of Ms. Fry's questions. Thank you. So Mr. Bielecki, you are next. You are the last cross-examiner of Mr. Lawrence. Before the break, you said you wanted to ask him about your exhibits. I just want to caution you or advise you, you will have a chance to talk about your exhibits when you testify. And that certainly will be the best way, or the best time and opportunity for you to explain your exhibits, what they show, and so forth. So I'm not clear exactly what you want to ask Mr. Lawrence, but I will allow you to proceed, but I just want to advise you for him, it's asking him questions, not making your own statements about these exhibits. So with that, would you like to proceed with your questions?
Yes, I'd like to go to Bielecki-1.
Okay, let's go ahead and put up exhibit Bielecki 1. And why don't you, if you want to just scroll down a little bit. Whoops. We'll try again to get Bielecki 1 up and scroll down.
Mr. Lilly, this is Mr. Wilder. Just to note, this document opened as a PDF package. So if we want to actually look at it, it opens up as another tab called Spring 4.
That's correct.
Okay. What can you look? Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen and see what happens here. Okay, that looks good. That's similar to my paper copy. Maybe can you go full screen on that one? All right, let's just leave it there for now and we can zoom in as we need to. Mr. Bielecki, what is your question of Mr. Lawrence about this exhibit?
My question is, Mr. Lawrence, have you visited Spring 4?
Yes, I have.
And do you recognize the top photograph?
Yes, I do.
And could you explain, please, what is the metal structure with a box on it in the right-hand side of the photograph?
That is a part of our monitoring system we're using to gauge the spring flow or the water elevation.
And how is that information gathered?
I don't have exact information on that.
Okay. Is that information recorded on a regular basis?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And on the lower photograph,
We'll scroll down.
do you recognize this as part of the same location?
Objection. This
What's
picture
your-
is vague.
The objection is overruled. Mr. Bilecki has asked him if he recognizes it. He can say yes or no.
I don't recognize that.
Okay. Is there visible water in the lower photograph?
Objection.
Wait, stop. Mr. Bilecki, I'm not going to allow you to ask him questions about a photo when he has said he does not recognize it. At that point, it's his interpretation has no independent value over anybody else's interpretation. So
Okay. Thank
you'll
you.
have to move on.
All right, I'd like to go to Bilecki 2.
Okay, let's go to Bilecki 2. See if we can scroll down. Here we go. You want to go to the first photo on this exhibit?
Please.
All right. We'll go to
And
full screen
that-
here.
Thank you. That photograph is actually oriented 90 degrees off axis, if you will.
I don't think we have any way to rotate it in a PDF, Mr. Bilecki. So you can ask him a question about it. We'll all just have to sort of turn our heads.
So, Mr. Lawrence, have you visited the headwater spring, which is in some of the maps we've seen also identified as the FS water right?
Objection. Vague.
I'm going to overrule that. He can answer that question if he knows.
Can you ask that again, Mr. Bilecki?
Question is, have you visited the headwater spring of Strawberry Creek?
I don't know what you're referencing with the headwater spring of Strawberry Creek.
All right. Have you visited the FS water right of Strawberry Creek, which is listed as a PDO, which is shown in some of the mapping that we've looked at in the last 3 days?
Objection. Vague. I'm just struggling to understand which.
I think the objection's overruled. Mr. Lawrence, there has been discussion about a spring associated with a Forest Service water right. I think the question is, have you visited the site of that spring?
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Yes, I have visited that site of that Forest Service boring catchment pipe.
And can we scroll up, please, to the next photographs?
Okay, we call that scrolling down, but go ahead.
Scrolling down. All right. We move to Bilecki 3.
Oh, okay. We will go to Bilecki 3.
And Mr. Lawrence, again, the top photo is 90 degrees off axis. The blue area is the top of the image. And Mr. Lawrence, do you recognize this image of one of the BTB PDOs?
Yes.
And to your recollection, is there surface water in any area around this PDO?
I don't recall.
Okay. If we could scroll down, please. And Mr. Lawrence, do you recognize this infrastructure as part of the BTB PDO.
Can I object? Can we, for purposes of clarifying the record, I'm just very concerned as to how this will read on a transcript. So to aid the process, I think that the question should be framed as, do you recognize what's depicted in the second image on a particular document? I'm really trying not to be difficult, but instead ensure that we're not making a confused record that could be misleading to many people.
Okay, I think it was fairly clear, but why don't you?
Are you sure?
Why don't you restate your question, Mr. Bielecki, and make sure you're referring to the second photo on Exhibit Bielecki 3, which is the one that's on the screen right now. So please restate your question with that reference. And you somehow you went on mute. I don't know how, but you're on mute. So please go off mute.
Yep.
There you go.
So in the Exhibit Bielecki 3, in the lower photograph labeled slight residual water outflow from white PVC pipe, do you recognize this photograph or this location?
I could not pinpoint that location, no.
Okay. And do you recognize the appearance of any water flowing from the white PVC pipe shown in the photograph?
Objection. He said he didn't recognize it. There's no foundation.
Yeah, Mr. Bielecki, I'm only going to allow you to ask Mr. Lawrence questions about photos where he recognizes the area depicted in the photo, because otherwise he doesn't have any special knowledge beyond the rest of us to interpret that.
Okay, very good. Could we go to Bielecki 4, please?
And we will see what we can do with Bielecki 4. Bielecki 4 was a video, a movie, and we had trouble displaying that. So I don't know whether we've been able to display it or not, because it was in a format that we could not go with initially, but I know my staff was trying. So Mr. Woldridge, do you know if we were able to get Bielecki 4 and the video associated with Bielecki 4 in a format where we can display it here?
Give me 1 second.
Okay, yeah, there are two files in our exhibit folder for Bielecki 4. One is the PDF of the email, and the other is a file of the movie. And while he's doing that, Mr. Bielecki, how long is this movie, time-wise?
10 seconds, 10 to 20 seconds.
Okay, if we can display it, we will. If we can't, we won't, obviously.
Okay.
I am unable to get it to show the video.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Bielecki, but I think you'll have to move on. This was in a format that we just could not process.
Okay. Can we go to Bielecki 5, please?
All right, we'll get Bielecki 5. And this exhibit has two photos, so make sure to make it clear which one you're asking a question about.
I'm asking about the upper photograph. So Mr. Lawrence, you testified that you have been to the headwater spring, otherwise referred to as the FS water right.
So what is your question? Okay, he did say he was familiar with what has been referred to as the spring associated with the Forest Service water rights. So go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Uh, Is the appearance of this cavern entrance
Objection, testifying.
No, not yet. Let him ask a question, please.
is the appearance of this cavern entrance similar to your visits to this FS water right?
Objection.
And that's, but yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. Mr. Lawrence, do you recognize this upper photo as being one that depicts an area in the vicinity of what I am calling the Forest Service headwater spring?
It does not look familiar to me.
All right. So Mr. Bielecki, again, as I said before, you're going to have an opportunity to testify to these photos, which you took, and obviously you're familiar with. But if Mr. Lawrence can't recognize it, it's not appropriate for you to ask him questions about it.
Okay, thank you. We'll review these at a later date then, as you've advised, Mr. Lilly. Thank you.
All right. So then, do you have any other questions?
Yes, I do.
All right, please proceed.
So, Mr. Lawrence, you stated in your previous testimony that the 2020 U.S. Forest Service Adapted Management Plant requested discharge of previously diverted water. Is that correct?
I don't have a recollection of that.
All right. You have stated that in 2020 there was overflow water specified in the ADM that was discharged at the 10, 11, and 12 sites. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't know what ADM is.
Excuse me, ADP, Adaptive Management Plan, AMP, excuse me.
Could you ask the question again, please?
So Mr. Bielecki, let me help you out here. Mr. Lawrence, did you previously testify that BlueTriton, or as one of its predecessors, began discharges of water that had been diverted from the tunnels and boreholes at a location just below the sites of boreholes 10, 11, and 12?
Yes, I did testify, and I believe I stated that it was installed in 2020 and I believe came online in 2021.
Okay, so if we're talking about that discharge, I think we're fairly clear. So Mr. Bielecki, do you have a question to Mr. Lawrence about that discharge?
Yes.
All right, go ahead and ask your question.
In the exhibit SOS 80, there was discharges shown for 2018 and 2019. The question is, did the adaptive management plan also request or require discharges in those 2 years prior to 2020?
Objection, it's compound, and we're talking about SOS 80.
Okay, we can put up SOS 80. That's the water drop figure. Mr. Bielecki, I'll try to help you out here. And
Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, correct me if I get this wrong. I believe Mr. Lawrence said that some of the discharges back to Strawberry Creek that are referenced in SOS 80, which we're going to put up, were in connection with testing programs that Nestle or BlueTriton was conducting. So with that background, please go ahead and ask your question.
All right, if we could enlarge the image, please.
Yes, we will do that. And we'll zoom on I assume you want to ask about the overflow.
Thank you, yes. So my question is the overflow shown for 2018 and 2019 part of the adaptive management plan with the U.S. Forest Service?
No, I don't believe it's specified in the adaptive management plan.
So how is it decided to have the overflow water released in that location?
So the overflow that was constructed in 2020 at just below 10, 11, 12 catchment was requested by the Forest Service, and we planned and designed that system with them in mind and with their approval. Completed that in 2020. It was not specified in the adaptive management plan.
So why was such a large volume of water returned to the Strawberry Canyon watershed below the sites of 10, 11, and 12 in 2018 and 2019?
As I stated earlier, we were doing testing at the various different boreholes and tunnels, and there was a large volume of water associated with that testing released into the area.
Okay. And was there any consideration for discharge in any of the boreholes or well sites other than the 10, 11, 12 complex or sites?
Action vague as to time and terms.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Bilecki, why don't you restate the question in terms of either 2018, 2019, or 2020?
Okay. For 2019, where 44.3 million gallons overflow was returned to Strawberry Canyon in the sites 10, 11, 12, was there consideration for returning that overflow to any other of the borehole or tunnel locations?
And I'm going to, Mr. Bilecki, that is misstating his testimony, so I'm not going to allow that question. He said in 2019 that the amount, or at least almost all or all of the amount that's encompassed in the 44.3 million gallons shown here was returned to the creeks at the sites of the boreholes and tunnels, not at 10, 11, and 12, because that discharge facility was not constructed until 2020. So you've really misstated his testimony.
I'm going to object because I believe respectfully that may misstate his testimony, because I believe that he stated that a lot of the discharge was at the silo at the base, and it's as of yet unclear what portion was discharged at the diversion points versus at the silo.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Doty. You're correct. He did say some amount was discharged at the silo. We don't have to go back into the record. The record will speak for itself. But the main point, Mr. Bilecki, is I don't think he has said there were any discharges at what I'm calling the borehole 10, 11, 12 site in 2018 or 2019. And your question assumed that there were. So I think you need to restate your question.
So where was the overflow water in the amount of 44 million gallons in 2019 returned to the Strawberry Canyon watershed?
So the water that was returned to the Strawberry Canyon watershed was from the various boreholes and tunnels that were being tested throughout that year. I don't have specific information for each one of those at this time.
Okay. And during your 2016 site visit, I believe it was June 15th with Ms. Stork and Mr. Vasquez, was there a U.S. Forest Service official present for that site visit?
As I recall, the U.S. Forest Service was on site on a separate trip. They were not associated with the site walk that we were involved in with the state board officials.
Thank you. And has the data collected by BlueTriton brands for the adaptive management plan been released for public review?
Objection, vague.
I'm going to allow him to answer if he can. If it's not clear to you what data are being discussed here, Mr. Lawrence, you may say so.
I would, if you don't mind, Mr. Bilecki, if you could just tell me which data, or be a little more specific about what you're asking.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bilecki, why don't you go ahead and, if you want to follow up on this, try to ask a more specific question.
Yeah. Has the data has the annual data collected by BTB for the adaptive management plan overseen by the Forest Service been released for public review?
I'm not aware of what the Forest Service is releasing. We submit data to the Forest Service personnel on a regular basis.
Okay. Has the data collected in the annual review for 2018 or 2019 been entered into evidence in this for this hearing?
Objection, vague. Irrelevant.
If you know, Mr. Lawrence, you may testify. There are a lot of exhibits and you may not know about all of them. So I'm going to allow the question, but please state if you know or if you don't know.
Mr. Bilecki, I don't know I don't know if data has been put into evidence or not.
Okay. So in 2003, the old fire damaged or destroyed much of the BTB piping infrastructure. You testified that that was materially rebuilt by December 2004. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you stated that there were mag meters, magnetic resonance meters installed at let me rephrase that. Did all of the tunnels and boreholes have mag meters, if you will, installed at their locations by December 2004?
No, they did not.
Could you specify which tunnels or boreholes did not have those meters installed by December 2004?
None of the tunnels or boreholes had mag meters installed in 2004.
All right. How were the diversions metered at all of the tunnels and boreholes as of December 2004 when the repairs were completed?
The borings had paddle wheel meters installed. And the tunnels had ultrasonic meters installed that measured the flow over a weir.
Thank you. Given the significant damage to the pipeline infrastructure during the 2003 old fire, was there any discussion with your peers at BTB or with the Forest Service to reduce diversions of water from Strawberry Creek?
Objection, vague as to time.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection, Mr. Bilecki. I think you're getting at right after December 2004, but that wasn't entirely clear. So why don't you ask him whether there were such discussions for diversions during a specified time period?
Okay. So after repairs were completed in approximately December 2004 from the old fire, was there any discussion with your peers at BTB or with the U.S. Forest Service to reduce diversions of water from Strawberry Creek?
From the boreholes and the tunnels at Strawberry Creek, there was, not that I recall, any discussion with the Forest Service. I don't recall if I had internal discussions at all.
Okay. And could we go to BTB-10, page 6?
Okay.
Line 23, 24.
What is your question?
My question is the question is where is the recordation point for the total amount of water diverted? Where is that recordation meter located?
Objection, vague as to time.
Okay, the sentence starting on line 22 says traditionally. So, Mr. Lawrence, in the time period that is referred to by traditionally, where was the meter located that measured the collection amounts?
Sorry, Mr. Lilly.
I think it says it here, but if you could just clarify what you mean by the statement on the sentence on lines 22 and 23.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Yes, prior to the installation of the mag meters at the individual borings and the two tunnels with the ultrasonic meters, we had and continue to have a totalizing meter at the bottom of the pipeline near the silo location. That was the meter which we used to calculate total flow.
All right, Mr. Bilecki, you may proceed.
Is total flow the same as total diversions?
Objection, vague. Are we referring to the sentence?
Yeah, Mr. Bilecki, I think that's a little unclear. I mean, total flow means the flow going through the pipe at this location. So that's pretty clear, but I'm not sure what you mean by total diversion. So I think you need to restate your question.
All right.
Or move on.
Is the amount of water diverted from all of the tunnels and boreholes recorded at the silo location referred to in lines 22 and 23?
Objection, vague as to time.
Yeah, and again, Mr. Bilecki, there are two different timeframes being discussed here. One is traditionally, and two is starting in 2020. So I think your question is in the time period referred to as traditionally, rather than after 2020. So why don't you restate your question so it is clear as to what time period you're talking about?
Okay. Between the time period of 2003 and 2019, was the amount of water, total water diverted in the tunnels and boreholes recorded at the silo location referred to in 22 and 23?
Water collected, excuse me, water collected in the pipeline at the various boreholes and tunnels was totalized, and all water collected was totalized at the meter down at the silo location.
Thank you. We've previously stated that approximately 20% of the flow goes to the Arrowhead Springs hotel owner, and that in 2020, that approximately 2/3 of the water diverted from all tunnels and boreholes was discharged in the area of the 10, 11, 12 sites. Is that correct?
Objection, misstates testimony and compound.
I think he can, I'm going to overrule the objection. Just, this is a foundational question. Is that what you testified or not?
I don't recall may I get some clarification on where that information is coming from?
Well, he said you previously testified to it. Mr. Bielecki, it's rather than our arguing about what he previously said or did not say, I think it's better for you just to ask him a question. He has test. You asked about 20% of the flow going to the Arrow Hotel and 2/3 being discharged. So I think you need to make clear what year you're talking about and split that up into different questions.
Okay.
And just ask him the questions rather than what he previously
Very
testified
good.
to.
Could we go back to Exhibit SOS 80, please?
Okay. We'll put up SOS 80 and we'll scroll down. All right, so go ahead, make sure you're clear as to year, type, and location here.
That's great, thank you. So I'm confused about the recordation of the amount of water between the top and the bottom. Would you describe for me, please, the water that is diverted from all tunnels and boreholes, and how that, and it's the path that it follows from the top of the from the diversion locations down to the silos where it is then offloaded to be bottled.
And Vegas to time.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and answer the question for 2018, 2019, and 2020, Mr. Lawrence, and if there's a difference for the 3 years, just make sure you're clear about the distinction.
Yes, sir, Mr. Lilly. The water flow, the collection of water flows into the pipeline. In 2018, we had certain testing going on. Much of the water that's represented by the 19.5 million gallons was turned back into the creek and flowed through the boreholes to on the ground near the catchments. Some of that water flowed, the rest of that water, flowed down the pipeline and was either bottled or was provided to the third-party hotel owner. And then a small amount of that water was just charged at the silo as overflow. That's the case for each year. Various different testing happened each year, and the flows represented are flows from gravity and associated with the recharge in the system. That's why you see the varying volumes for each individual year.
And Mr. Lawrence, could you describe the where the recordation point is for the diversions that are reported to the water master for 2018?
So I think I stated earlier the recordation point was at the bottom of the system at the silo location.
So how, if the recordation point is at the bottom of the system, then how is the water going to the Arrowhead Springs property owner accounted for in that recordation?
I believe I spoke to Mr. Petrozelli about this. There's a separate meter that we use to calculate that flow.
And is that flow then subtracted from the amount of recordation?
It's recorded as part of the recordation.
And is the amount of the overflow that's returned to the Strawberry Canyon watershed, is that also part of the recordation?
If it flowed into the pipeline, it would be part of the recordation.
And for the year 2020, are each individual tunnel or borehole now metered with a remotely accessed way of measuring flow?
The mag meters were installed in 2020 and came online in 2021.
Okay. And is there currently for 2020 a method for closing the water diversion from each of the tunnels and borehole sites?
There is no method for shutting the tunnels. There's no valving to shut a tunnel off. Each individual boring has a valve that is hand operated.
That would be hand operated at each of the borehole sites?
Yeah, a valve at each boring.
Okay. Is there any way to restrict or stop the flow from any of the diversion tunnels?
Asked and answered. Objection.
That it's overruled. Go ahead if you can. And I think before he said there's no valving, but now the question is there any way to restrict the flow from the tunnel? So it's a different question.
The tunnels are gravity flow, and they flow over a weir. There is no way to restrict their flow.
So there is no other valving in the pipeline, in the pipeline, once the water leaves the tunnel?
There are pressure reducing valves and pressure relief valves throughout the pipeline.
I think,
And
Mr. Bilecki, we may have, I'm going to try to help out here. Mr. Lawrence, at Tunnel 2, is there a valve that would allow BlueTriton to stop the flow from the tunnel into the pipeline at that location?
There, at Tunnel 2 and Tunnel 3, we can cap the piping system and divert the flow through a drain. That's our only option.
Okay, so if you do that cap valve, then no water goes into the pipe and it all goes into the drain.
That's correct.
All right, I think that makes it clear, Mr. Bilecki. Mr. Bilecki, I'm coming up on my conference call. How much more time do you want for or need for your questioning?
I think just a couple of minutes.
Okay, well, why don't you try? Because I only have a couple of minutes, so
Okay.
go ahead. But I'm going to have to stop in about 2 minutes.
Yeah. So is currently in 2021, is there any water flowing from Tunnel 2 to the ground?
Yes. Some time ago, I don't recall what year, we installed flora-fauna drinkers at the tunnels and spring sites. So there's water flowing from those flora-fauna feeders.
Okay. And Mr. Lawrence, do you have the access to the locked vault at Tunnel 2?
Do I have access to the locked vault
Well,
at Tunnel 2?
let me rephrase that. Can the vault the vault door at Tunnel 2 be opened for the site visit?
I believe we will open the vaults and the boring locations during the site visit,
Thank you.
as we have in the past.
Thank you. That's the end of my questions.
Okay, so we're going to take a break, but Mr. Bilecki, my staff has advised me that they can play your video. So when we come back, we'll play the video again. I don't know whether Mr. Lawrence is going to be able to recognize it or not, but I'll give you the right to ask him a question about that. It's the only question left. And then, of course, if he can't identify it when you testify, you can testify to the video. So
Thank you.
let's plan to come back at 2:45. If for some reason I'm still in my call, I will advise my staff and they can let you know about, basically postponing the break. But right now we'll be on break until 2:45 p.m. Thank you. try again. We're coming off break here. I'll ask my staff to take down the break sign. And then after you've done that, put up the video recording that's part of Bilecki Exhibit 4.
Mr. Lilly, this is Robert Donlin.
Yes, Mr. Donlin.
During the break, we may have lost Mr. Lawrence. Do you see if he is?
He's right above you, waving his hand and smiling.
Okay, I can't see him on my screen.
Okay, well, can other people? I can see Mr. Lawrence. He looks very happy considering what he's been through the last 2 days. Can anybody else not see Mr. Lawrence? All right. So and let's see, is Mr. Bilecki on yet? Yes, you are there. Okay, so Mr. Bilecki, I said I would allow you one more question. I think we have figured out how to play the video. So if you can, and Mr. Lawrence, go ahead and watch it carefully. If it's only 10 or 20 seconds long, we can repeat it if we need to. But we'll go ahead and play it. And then if you have questions for Mr. Lawrence about it, you may ask your question. So Mr. Anderson or Mr. Woolridge, please go ahead and start it if you can. Okay, is that the video? In fact, oh, here we go.
That's it.
Okay, we're playing it now. All right, so I'll say, Mr. Bilecki, I'll ask Mr. Lawrence if he recognizes the area depicted by that. It's a little hard to follow, and frankly, it may be better for you to testify about that, but let's just start. We're playing it one more time, Mr. Lawrence, watch. And Mr. Lawrence, based on having watched that video twice, do you recognize the area that's depicted by that video?
I do not.
Okay, Mr. Bilecki, I know you're doing the best you can, but that's going to be a lot better. You can go ahead and take that down, Mr. Anderson. That's going to be a lot better for you to testify to, since you took the video and obviously are familiar with that. So when we get to your testimony, I'll certainly allow you to testify about that. Of course, parties may object, but I will give you that opportunity to describe that. So,
And I'd like to ask my final question.
oh, I thought that was it, but go ahead. If you have one more, I'll allow one more.
Thank you. So, Mr. Lawrence, in your description of your job responsibilities, you referred to responsibilities that included being the primary contact for permitting with the U.S. Forest Service. Why was a permit that expired in 1978 not addressed for appropriate renewal prior to the public scoping meeting in April 14th of 2016?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence and characterizes the nature of the document.
Okay. I think we can cut through this pretty well. Mr. Lawrence, this is probably something, well, I don't know whether you know or not. This seems to get into the Forest Service process, but do you have sufficient knowledge to answer why it took the number of years it took from the expiration of the old permit to the issuance of the new permit, what the cause was for that time frame?
I do not.
All right. So, Mr. Bilecki, I think that really covers it. This probably really goes beyond his area of knowledge. Some of it was way before he started working for Nestle. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my questions. And I apologize, Mr. Lawrence, if I've been trying to write these down in some kind of a logical order, but they're a little bit of a mess. So please bear with me. First of all, something that I've wondered about, I think I know the answer, but what is the difference between a borehole and a tunnel?
So, Mr. Lilly, a borehole is a drilled, essentially a horizontal borehole is essentially a horizontal well, and constructed similarly as a vertical well. So there's a boring that takes place, and then in some cases they are lined, in some cases they are not, but ultimately there's a seal at the top 50 feet in California, and then a casing put in that seals that concrete in place to the formation. A tunnel is an excavation generally by man and or machine, but much larger in diameter and a structure which I view that a person can walk into and walk out of.
Okay, thank you. And then just to clarify, the seal of the top 50 feet, that's for sanitary purposes, is that correct?
That's correct, sanitary seal.
So that leads me to a question then. How does BlueTriton address sanitary seal issues with a tunnel where you can't have a sanitary seal?
So the tunnel, the water is collected differently in a tunnel. There is no sanitary seal. And there is the tunnel itself is the collection point, and water quality is managed differently in there. It doesn't meet the criteria of well in the state of California.
So do you have to do any kind of, I'll just ask, what do you do to make that water is potable if it comes from a tunnel and goes into the pipe and on down the system?
Yeah, so none of the water we collect is potable until it is bottled.
Okay, I'll just ask it another way. What do you do to avoid risks of contamination of water flowing in a tunnel?
Sure. So the tunnel, the collection is back in the tunnel a ways, and the tunnel is sealed.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think that might be something you can show us when we're on site, but
Absolutely.
Just explain, how is the tunnel? What do you mean when you say the tunnel is sealed? I'm not following that.
So there's a concrete structure that goes back into the hillside quite some ways. You might consider it to be the sanitary seal, actually. That concrete structure in Tunnel 2 goes all the way back to the back of the formation where the water comes into the tunnel. Same is true in Tunnel 3, it's further back. But all that concrete structure keeps all of the formation out of the tunnel.
Okay. All right. My next question is, and again, I'm just confused. We've heard about a bottling facility in, I'll say, near downtown Los Angeles. I forget the street names, with references back to 1917. But then a lot of the BlueTriton letterheads have an Ontario address. And where is the water that comes out of these boreholes and tunnels we've been talking about bottled?
So over the years, we've bottled it at our Los Angeles factory on Washington Boulevard, our Ontario factory on Harupa Street in Ontario, our Cabazon factory in Cabazon, and at two local bottlers in San Bernardino as well.
Okay, and are any of those facilities on parcels that contain or are adjacent to Strawberry Creek or any of the creeks into which Strawberry Creek flows?
No, none of those factories are. Nope.
Okay. I think we've covered the 20% that goes to the Arrowhead Hotel, and the data for 2018, 2019, 2020 shows the numbers varied, but can you just elaborate on to me, is that a hard, fast requirement, or is it more of a goal that it's 20% of the water that flows down the pipe goes to the hotel?
We meter it at 20%. It is not hard at 20%. We typically are over slightly 20%. We don't like to go under ever, but we always try to provide at least 20%.
And what do you mean when you say you meter it at 20%?
That's what we try to provide to through the tribes meter is 20% of the flow that we're seeing in the pipeline.
Okay, and that probably follows up on my next question. Is there some kind of valve arrangement so you can control how much water goes to the hotel versus how much goes down to the tank transfer station?
Yes, Mr. Lilly, there is, and that valve system has changed a few times to try different methods. We've tried automating it. We currently have a system where we turn water into it electronically, but we do it portions of the day.
Okay, so it's the 20%. It's implement the 20% on a daily basis then?
It's a monthly basis that we report it. And so sometimes we will supply more during some days than others.
Okay, and I guess it leads me to wonder, does the hotel then have a tank or something? Or have some way that they don't get an overflow if you give them too much water?
Yeah, they have a tank system. They have a few different systems of tanks that they store water in.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding the plumbing at each diversion point, I think you have covered this, but I'm going to ask first about the tunnels. You said I think you said at tunnels 2 and 3, there's a valve you can do, which you said would cap the pipe. If you do that, then does the water you said the water flows into a drain. Is that correct?
Mr. Lilly, that is correct. That if we cap the pipeline, then the water flows out of a drain pipe underground, very close to where the tunnel entrance is. We will see that on the tour, just about 20, 30 feet away from the tunnel catchment.
And then where does that water go if it goes down the drain? Where does the drain water come out?
It goes onto the hillside in front of the tunnel.
Okay. And what about for the boreholes? I think you said you can just turn those valves off. If you turn a borehole valve off, then there's no water flow out of the borehole?
That's correct.
Okay. And one of the things I've been wondering about, and again, please don't infer that there's any pre-decisional component here. I have no idea what this proposed order is going to say. I'm grappling with it and still thinking about it. And of course, we'll still be receiving more evidence, including rebuttal evidence. But just I'm wondering that the draft cease and desist order proposed that I'll just say that Spring and Tunnel 7 complex, that BlueTriton be required to bypass 48% of the inflow. And I asked Mr. Vasquez about this, and he basically said, well, BlueTriton would have to come up with I forgot the exact word, basically some kind of a management plan. But I guess my question for you is, with the current plumbing and metering, would it be feasible for BlueTriton to bypass a specified percentage of the total flow at, I'll just say, the Spring 7, Tunnel 7 complex?
So the flow out of, as an example, out of the Spring 7 complex, I'm going to put my headset on here for a second, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Go ahead.
I don't know if you can. Somebody had the problem yesterday. I have a guy blowing leaves next to me right now. But if it's quiet, I won't worry about it. But the Spring 7 complex, there's 4 borings. Those 4 borings have different flow rates. As we close or shut in each individual borings, those flow rates can fluctuate. Very difficult to hold a particular flow out of those, because it will just, as water builds up in the aquifer, it changes the hydraulics of the system a bit. And so without an automated system to control 48%, as an example, there's no way to guarantee that. Now, that's something we would probably have to visit on a frequent basis to adjust, to manage. So there's no logistical way to manage that.
Okay, so right now, with current plumbing, if there were an order like that, it would require some kind of frequent adjusting of the valving to get that kind of a percentage of bypass.
Probably daily.
Okay. All right, let me just check my notes here. I don't No, we'll see if we need to put up your testimony. I don't think we do. You referred to the discharge. I'm going to just say below boreholes 10, 11, and 12 that was installed in 2020. And you said that your testimony says that that's metered. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I think you said the metering started at the beginning of 2021. Is that correct?
Yeah, we installed the meters in 2020. We had some growing pains with the equipment. It's become effectively useful in 2021 here.
Okay.
In 2021, sorry.
So can you provide well, first of all, is that daily meter data?
That meter runs through our data acquisition system, so it's actually metered much more frequently than that.
Okay, but can you make an output that has daily flow data shown?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Can you provide that to us to add to the administrative record? I think that would be useful to have that data.
Okay.
And a related question, the hotel meter, what kind of meter is on the flows that go to the hotel?
That is a propeller meter, micrometer, I believe, propeller meter.
Okay, a totalizing meter.
Yes.
And how often does BlueTriton read that meter, or does the hotel read the meter?
The hotel reads it. We do check it, but the hotel is officially reading it once a month.
Do you get those data from them?
I do.
Okay, and how far back do those data go?
I'd have to look at our records.
Okay, I'm trying to just assemble our database. Can you also provide those? If it's only monthly data, that's fine, but as far back as you can, I would appreciate getting that data as well. Those data as well, I should say. Okay, thank you. The next question also concerns metering at the two tunnels and the various boreholes. I understand now you have what I'm going to call state-of-the-art metering at each one, but it still isn't clear to me, and I'm sorry if I just didn't take notes down well enough. Before 2020, did you have a meter at each one of those diversions?
Mr. Lilly, I apologize. I had to put on these headphones and I didn't hear that question. So
okay, I'll repeat it, and if we need to take a break, that's fine.
we're okay. We'll be okay.
So before 2020, was there a separate meter on each one of the diversions at the two tunnels and the approximately 10 boreholes?
Yes, there was.
Okay, what kinds of meters were those before 2020?
The borings had a paddle wheel propeller style meter, and the tunnels had the ultrasonic meters that they still have today.
Okay, and so then were there continuous recorders for all of those?
There were, but the propeller meters tended to stop functioning at times.
Okay, but did BlueTriton and its predecessors maintain the data from those meters?
Oh, we did.
Yeah. Okay. The question I have, and if you need to, I'll pull up your testimony, or my staff will pull up your testimony. I don't think we probably need to, but you said tradition. This is on page 6 in paragraph 26. Well, maybe we should just pull it up. It probably makes it easier for you, Mr. Woldridge. If you can pull up BTB 10, page 6. Oh, wow, that was quick. Gosh, she's good. Just zoom out one so we make it a little bigger for those of us with old eyes. Other way, there we go. Okay, so Mr. Lawrence, the first two sentences state, traditionally the volume of water annually collected at Arrowhead Springs was reported through a flow meter totalizer at the silo location. And I do understand that. You've talked about that. The data was then proportionally divided among the individual sources using the individual meters at each source. So then this is before 2021. So please just describe how the data was proportionally divided among the individual sources.
Certainly.
Mr. Lilly, I apologize to interrupt. Ms. McGuire has been kicked offline.
Oh, no.
So could we just pause for a moment and see if we can get her back in?
Yes. Do you know what happened?
She sent me a note saying she asked if everything froze and then said, I'm offline. So
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay, so let's pause for a moment. Mr. Anderson or Mr. Woolridge, Ms. Blunt, can one of you, is there some request from Ms. McGuire to get back into the meeting?
We haven't received a request yet, Mr. Lilly.
I'm gonna pause and just call her.
Okay.
Mr. Lilly,
Yes.
I just spoke with Ms. McGuire. She's having some, it looks like technical issues and she's trying to reconnect.
Okay, we do have a telephone number to phone in on our hearing notice.
She's trying to get in through her phone right now. I think she said she had Zoom on her phone and was trying to participate that way.
Okay, I do see her in the waiting room here. I'm going to click on admit, see what happens.
Thank you for your patience.
Okay, Ms. McGuire, it looks like you may be coming back.
I'm here, Mr. Lilly, by phone.
Okay, we see you in person too. We see you audio and video through your phone. So thank you for your patience. I don't think it was our mistake this time the way it was last time during the
No, I think
status conference.
we can blame Cox on this.
All right, well, we'll go ahead. So Mr. Lawrence, as I was asking you about the testimony, which you said before 2020, when you put in the individual meters, the sentence says the data was then proportionally divided among the individual meters using individual sources using individual meters at each source. Can you just explain how BlueTriton and its predecessors did that in the pre-2020 era?
I can, Mr. Lilly. In most cases, we would take our data set and look at it at periods of time when all of the meters were functioning correctly, and calculate the percentages based on that period. If in fact we didn't have a period like that, then we would go up and physically clean the meters out, take flow meter readings over a short period of time, usually a day, and then use that percentage at each borehole for the proportioning.
Okay, and then did you use that apportionment, I'll say, and the related calculations to determine how much then to list in the groundwater extraction notice, the annual report for each source?
Yes, we did.
All right, thank you. Moving downstream a little bit, or quite a bit, we've heard a fair amount of testimony about Coldwater Canyon, and I'll just ask Mr. Woldridge to put up exhibit PT12 and go to page 5, just so we make sure we're all talking about the same canyon. Okay. So this shows Coldwater Creek. And my question is, are you aware of any springs in the Coldwater Creek watershed?
I'm not aware of any springs in the Coldwater Creek watershed.
And while we're down there in that part, oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. I apologize. Going back to the meters, I'll just ask you if I can give you a homework assignment, and this can go in your rebuttal evidence, but I think it would really help all of us, and this is an engineering question that I think you're qualified to answer, if you could prepare, and as necessary, work with your staff, a detailed schematic that shows the sources, the valves, the meters, and the pipes from top to bottom under the current configuration. You've described it about as well as anybody could possibly describe it, but I think a schematic picture might be very helpful for us. So I'm just going to put in that request for you to do that. I'm sure you will be at least participating in the hearing during the rebuttal phase, and that will be down the road a few weeks, but I think that would be quite helpful for all of us.
Okay.
And then, okay, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. I think you said the current meters at the sources have a time step for reading that's less than 1 day. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you can assemble daily data from those meter readings?
I can.
Yeah, okay. All right. Related to the hotel, the current Arrowhead Springs hotel site, I don't think anybody has asked you this, and I don't know if you know the answer, but is the parcel on which that hotel is located, does that contain or border, I think at that point it would be East Twin Creek, the creek into which Strawberry Creek flows?
I believe the hotel property does border East Twin Creek.
Okay, that's the parcel on which that property is located?
I believe so.
Okay, and is the hotel then in the same, I assume it's in the watershed of East Twin Creek, is that correct?
I believe so.
All right. Okay, terminology. Now I'll ask you engineering questions regarding your testimony. You talked about shut-in tests. What are shut-in tests? for the civilians here among us.
Well, I don't profess to be a hydrogeologist, so I'll do the best engineering description I can.
So tell me your understanding of what shut-in tests are.
I'll do so. The shut-in test is a test that we set up some recording equipment ahead of time, and then we shut the valve off at the boring, at a particular boring, or maybe a multiple borings. Just depends on what the test arrangements are. And then that system is held closed for a period of time. It's shut in. And then the aquifer is takes different hydraulic conditions as time transpires. And then we record all of that data. At one point in the test, after a period of time, usually after the hydraulics stabilize, so we don't see it increasing any further, we will open it and measure how quickly it drains down. And then we'll generally repeat that process a few times or multiple times to complete a test, much like a pumping test from a well.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then what is a turnout test? That was the other type of test you mentioned.
Sure. Turnout test is, you can think of it as just the opposite. Primarily, we use that in the tunnels, where we turn out the tunnel to drain down the water level in the tunnel as low as we can. Again, trying to measure hydraulic conditions in the system. And then we will shut that or open the system back, or I should say block the system, the drain, we'll block the drain back off and recover and go through the same process of recovery, drain down, and record that process. It's not nearly as much head to work with. Obviously, it's usually only a foot or so, but it does give you some responsive data.
So is that just for tunnels, or do you also do that at boreholes?
We will do a drain down test at the boreholes as well, usually associated with the shut-in test.
So you'll do a shut-in and then a turnout test?
Right. And then shut back in and turn back out.
Okay. Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate that. So
my pleasure.
I'm going to turn back to Ms. McGuire, who is now here again. Thank you. Do you have redirect questions that you would like to ask Mr. Lawrence?
I do, Mr. Lilly, just a small list of questions.
Okay, and do you have any time estimate for that?
I would say 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the outside.
Okay, and I just want to, well, go ahead and do that. And our rules do require that redirect be limited to the scope of the cross. Cross is allowed to go beyond direct. I didn't write this government code section, but it's there. But redirect is limited to the scope of cross. Although cross was pretty broad here, so you have a fair amount of territory you may cover. But please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lilly. Could we pull up BTB 12, page 2?
Okay, BTB 12, page 2.
And would you, yes, scroll down. This should be the news article dated 9/22/17. It was the basis for some of Mr. Petruzzelli's questions.
Okay, and we're zooming in on the article at the bottom that says, it has the headline, whoops, it went away. We're doing the best we had. Arrowhead Springs plant completed. There we go.
Excellent.
Excellent. Okay, good.
Mr. Lawrence, would you please read the final paragraph of that article? And I think we're going to have to scroll up just a bit.
We're going to try. Hopefully we won't lose it. There we go.
According to Seth Marshall, president of the Arrowhead Springs Company, this plant is the culmination of many years of preparation.
Thank you.
Right. Please proceed.
All right, we don't need BTB 12 any longer. So I want to just touch briefly on these discharge points. There seems to be quite a bit of confusion about them. So first, I'm going to ask Mr. Lawrence, could you please tell me, as of 2021, how many discharge points for silo overflows exist in Strawberry Canyon?
There is one discharge point in Strawberry Canyon and one at the silos.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested in the one then at the silos.
Okay.
Could you please tell me where that discharge point is relative to those silos?
Yeah, the discharge is right next to the silos, and it discharges into essentially a drain system that then drains into eventually into East Twin Creek from one of the drainages along the property.
Okay, thank you. Is that discharge permitted under any state or federal laws?
We have a MPDES permit for those types of discharges.
Okay. And is there any relationship between the discharge point at the silos versus the discharge point just below Springs 10, 11, and 12?
Is there, I'm sorry, could you ask that to me? Ask me one more time, please.
Is there any relationship, let me just say, clarify that. Is there any relationship in terms of volume that's released at discharge points between the one down at the silo and the one that's just below Springs 10, 11, and 12?
Yes, today the primary discharge is at the one at just below 10, 11, 12 in Strawberry Creek. And the silo discharge is a minor discharge that we discharge water from to keep our system clean, just to keep water flowing. It's very low flow discharge.
Have you ever been asked about the discharge from the silos by anyone from the Water Rights Division enforcement?
Not prior to this week.
Okay. And with respect to the discharge point below 10, 11, and 12, has anyone asked you about them other than the questioning this week from the Division enforcement section?
No.
Okay. Mr. Lawrence, do you know whether BlueTriton has provided the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District with updated ownership information about each of its spring locations?
I do not.
Okay. Mr. Lawrence, you've testified that you're responsible for the collection, or I'm sorry, for the reporting of spring water from the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Does BlueTriton collect any water from Arrowhead Springs that is not reported annually to the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District?
No, we do not.
Does BlueTriton collect any water in Strawberry Canyon other than at the boreholes and tunnels identified during this hearing?
It does not.
Okay. Let's just go briefly to Story of Stuff Exhibit 80.
Okay, we'll put up exhibit SOS 80.
I can only see part of it. Oh, there we go.
What part do you want us to zoom in on? Or do you want us to zoom out and look at the whole thing?
If you could zoom out to look at the entire page. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Lawrence, do you know when this brochure was prepared?
I don't know the exact date.
Okay.
It's in 2020.
Okay. Did you write this brochure?
I did not.
Do you know who the intended audience was for this brochure?
This brochure, I believe, was posted on our webpage, so general public.
And would you agree that the terminology used in this brochure may not have the same meaning as the terms are used in this proceeding?
And Ms. McGuire, I'm going to not allow that question. That really is a leading question, and I think you're going to have to state your question in a non-leading way because this Mr. Lawrence is your witness.
Yeah. Mr. Lawrence, do you know whether or not the authors of the brochure were lawyers?
I don't believe they were lawyers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, let me ask you, with respect to the op-ed piece that you wrote for the Desert Sun that you were questioned about by Ms. Doty, could you tell me, when you wrote that piece, did you intend those words with relative to surface water to reflect legal terminology as it's used here under California law?
And Ms. McGuire, again, that's a leading question. Please restate it in a way that it's not a leading question.
So I guess it's an objection. Can we identify the exhibit and news article? Just
I
so I
think
know
that
which
was-
one she's asking about.
I think it's SOS 266. Is that, do you happen to know, Ms. McGuire?
I believe that is correct, Mr.
So
Lilly.
you can ask your question. If we need to, we'll put it up, but please ask a question that's not a leading question here.
Okay. When you wrote this op-ed piece for the Desert Sun, did you intend it to be utilized in a court of law?
I did not.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, I know that you've been in Strawberry Canyon many times. Have you seen remnants of old pipelines in Strawberry Canyon?
Yes, I have.
And have you seen any remnants of pipelines in Coldwater Canyon?
Yes, I have.
Have you seen remnants of old pipelines in Indian Canyon?
Objection leading.
No, I'm going to overrule that objection. I think this is appropriate. And please restate the question or repeat the question, Ms. McGuire.
I mean, it can be stated in a way that's not leading.
Well, I don't view this as a leading question. So you may repeat the question, Ms. McGuire.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, have you seen remnant pipelines in Indian Canyon?
Yes, I have.
And have you seen remnants of old pipelines in Waterman Canyon?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Lawrence, do you know the dates of the construction of those pipelines in those canyons?
No, I don't know the dates of the pipeline construction.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of more quick questions. Water that's collected in BTB's pipeline, Strawberry Canyon, and delivered downstream to the silos, any way treated prior to being loaded into the trucks?
The only treatment that takes place is there is a ultraviolet light system at the silos to disinfect at the silo location. No other.
Okay. And actually, that will end of my questions. Thank you very much.
All right. At this point, we are ready to have you, Ms. McGuire, offer BTB's exhibits into evidence if you want to. Do you want to do that?
Yes, I would.
And I'm going to try to find my file with them. Such a mess here. Anyway, tell me which exhibits you want to offer into evidence.
Mr. Lilly, there has been redirect that generally provides an opportunity for recross.
Okay, Mr. Petrozelli, I'm going to allow you recross, but it's got to be limited to the questions Ms. McGuire just
Oh,
asked.
of course.
So go ahead.
Okay. Can I get a 5-minute biological break first?
Okay, we'll come back at 3:35. We'll give you 6 minutes. We're still 1 minute early, but I see Mr. Petrozelli, you're there. What exhibit did you want us to put up? We could be putting it up on the screen. But you have to go off mute too.
First, I believe the only exhibit I need is BTB 12. And
Okay.
again, you can go to the bottom of page 2 to the same article. And I'm asking about the same paragraph.
Okay, so Mr. Woldridge, it's now 3:35. So why don't you go ahead and put up BTB 12, page 2, and be zooming in on that article at the bottom of, I think it was the third column. Okay, and I think he said he wanted to go look at that last. Do you want the bottom part of that?
Yes, the last paragraph, the same one Ms. McGuire asked about.
Okay.
Yes. So, are we ready?
Let's see. It looks like we're ready. You may proceed with your questions.
Okay. So, Mr. Lawrence, just to reorient you, can you I'm asking about what looks like the third column on the screen. It is a lower portion of the newspaper article Ms. McGuire asked you about, and I would like to direct your attention to the last paragraph. She asked you to read it, but I'd like you to read it again, unless Mr. Lilly doesn't find it necessary.
Here, I'll just read it. Maybe that'll help make it go a little faster. According to Seth Marshall, president of the Arrowhead Springs Company, this plant is the culmination of many years of preparation. So go ahead and ask your next question.
Mr. Lawrence, isn't that a pretty general statement?
Objection, vague.
Mr. Petrozelli, at this point, I'm going to sustain the objection. I mean, we can all interpret this just as well as Mr. Lawrence can. I don't see any benefit in having him answer that question.
But Mr. Lawrence, does it indicate how many years?
Multiple
Okay,
years.
that's a reasonable question. You may answer that.
Multiple years in
Does
plural.
it give a number?
It does not give a number.
Okay. Does it describe what preparations were made?
No.
No. Okay. For instance, does it indicate that any permits were applied for?
Objection.
Okay, Mr. Petrozelli, I'm going to cut this off. You can make closing arguments about what this sentence says or doesn't say, as well as you can ask Mr.
No,
Lawrence.
I think we've covered this adequately.
Okay, thank you. Move on.
So, Mr. Lawrence, I wanted to. Ms. McGuire asked you whether the discharge overflow point near the silo has an NPDES permit, I believe. And I hope I'm not mischaracterizing testimony. Do you recall her question? And do you recall your answer?
I'm not sure if that question was characterized exactly that way. I mean, I do recall the question.
Okay, but does the discharge overflow point near the silo have an NPDES permit?
We have NPDES permit for those types of discharges, is what I believe I said.
Okay, and why do you have an NPDES permit for those types of discharges?
We have a NPDES permit because we do cleaning.
Okay.
And we maintain that permit for that cleaning.
Do you have an NPDES permit for the overflow discharge point near boreholes 10 through 12 that has been in use since, I think you said it was 2021 that it came online?
We do not have a discharge permit for that.
Okay.
Location.
Okay. And then my last question, I think Ms. McGuire was asking you about old pipelines in various areas. I think in one of your responses, you might have said you saw old pipelines in Indian Canyon? I'm
Objection
wondering
to
if you
their question.
misspoke.
Wait. What's your question? Go ahead and ask your question, Mr. Petroselli.
Did you indicate that you had seen old pipelines in Indian Canyon?
Yes,
Okay, is there an Indian Canyon?
we could, if we could pull up one of the exhibits. I'm sure we
Okay.
can.
Mr. Petroselli, I took that to mean the canyon in which Indian Springs is located. If you want to,
Yeah.
we'll pull up PT 12, page 5.
Yeah, it's just that this is the first time we've heard Indian Canyon, and there's also Strawberry Canyon and Coldwater Canyon.
All right,
so-
all right. Do you want us to put up PTT 12, page 5 or not?
No, I'm only wondering if you meant Coldwater Canyon or Strawberry Canyon, or if you really did mean Indian Canyon.
Excuse me, Mr. Lawrence, when you said Indian Canyon, what canyon were you referring to?
I was referring to the canyon that is fed by Indian Springs.
Right. Okay. Mr. Petroselli, you may move on.
Those are the only questions I had.
All right. Ms. McGuire, do you want to offer your BlueTriton's exhibits into evidence? And I will say that some of them, BlueTriton's BTB 23 through 37, and it wasn't every number, but it was the numbers that were offered, have already been admitted into evidence. So, and frankly, it just drives me crazy when people don't number exhibits sequentially, but you didn't. So I have before me BTB 1 through 5 and 10 through 16. Are those the exhibits you want to consider here? You're on mute, so go off mute.
They are.
And do you want to offer those exhibits into evidence?
I do. I would like to offer all of them into evidence. I believe the foundation has been laid by the written and oral testimony of Mr. Lawrence.
Okay, you don't need to argue yet. Let's see if we get any objections first, which we may. It looks like Ms. Doty's hand up. Go ahead, Ms. Doty.
Yes.
Do you have objections to some of these exhibits?
I do, and I just wanted to remind you that we had filed something the morning that the hearing started, which was a response to BlueTriton Brand's motion in limine, and then a motion in limine for equitable standards of admissibility of evidence. And the reason for that is that BlueTriton Brands had objected to a lot of our evidence, that their own evidence would not meet the standards that they were suggesting be applied to ours. So and as I've asked some questions of Mr. Lawrence today, for example, he's not sure what book some things came from.
All right. I'm sorry, I have not read that yet, and we haven't yet addressed the question of admissibility of any of the Story of Stuff exhibits. So do you have, I think the way we're going to have to proceed today is, do you have any specific objections to any of these BlueTriton Brands exhibits that are being offered into evidence?
Well, only if our evidence is going to be held to a different standard, I guess, because, for example, Ms. Fry pretty clearly identified some of the newspaper articles. I'm fine with the articles coming in. I find Ms. Fry to be a reliable source. All indications are that BlueTriton Brands does as well, or they wouldn't have put her sourced articles into their exhibit list.
Okay. I don't want all this argument about your exhibits now. I will assure you I will do my very best to apply the same standards to the admissibility of all parties' exhibits. And with that, do you have any objections to BlueTriton's exhibits?
Then I suppose, yes, I do have the objections that were submitted in writing on Monday morning.
Okay. And are those your only objections?
They are.
Let me see if I can find those.
To assist, that portion of our Monday filing starts at PDF page 23 of the document.
And I'm looking for the document as well too. So if we can hold till we're all at the same page, I would appreciate that.
We're getting there. So and again, I have a paper copy which starts on page 19 with a heading, "The parties' evidence should be treated equitably." And then on page 20, page 20, it says BTB exhibits, and then it talks in some detail about BTB 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16.
That's correct.
So those, and I do see that there are some fairly lengthy objections to those, which I'm just going to confess I have not read yet. So I think I will need to read before deciding whether to admit those exhibits. That basically covers every single exhibit they're offering. Is that the extent of your objections to those exhibits?
It is, but I would like to qualify that again, that we are fine with these coming in as long as BlueTriton will withdraw its objections to our evidence that meets the same standards that, we just want equitable treatment.
Okay, well, I will certainly try to treat all parties equitably. So does any other party have any objections to any of BlueTriton's exhibits? All right, I don't see any other objections. Ms. McGuire, do you have any objections to, excuse me, of course you don't object to your own exhibits. Do you have any responses that you would like to make now to Ms. Doty's arguments?
Mr. Lilly, I just have one observation. With the exception of 2 of those exhibits, every single one of them are also entered as exhibits for the prosecution.
You mean they are PT exhibits with just
They
different?
are all BT exhibits as well, with the exception of BT 15 and BTB 16.
Okay. So the others have already all been admitted into evidence, you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, I'll have to take a look at that. And this is a little bit for me to sort out. These are important arguments that both of you are making.
But again, I want to be very clear that we will stipulate to withdraw if BlueTriton will withdraw its objections to ours. They are the ones who submitted a motion in limine first. Ours is responsive to theirs.
I think your point is pretty clear. But I have to evaluate. I will just say I've been busy preparing for this hearing. So I have not read their motion in limine, the part that concerns your exhibits. I read the part that I ruled on earlier, but I deferred ruling on the part concerning sort of stuff exhibits and this. So I'm going to have to look at both and decide. But I certainly want parties the same way, equitably, I'll say. All right, Ms. Fry, let me go to Mr. Petrozelli first.
Right, Mr. Lilly, you glitched out there. You said, I'm going to have to look at both and decide, but certainly.
Okay, I'm sorry. I must be voice activated and I wasn't activating my microphone. I just said, certainly I will treat all parties equitably. And I will defer ruling until I've had a chance to read these papers. So it looks like this prompted a round of hands. Mr. Petrozelli, I saw your hand. Do you want to say something or are you done?
No, I'm done. I heard you cut out momentarily like everybody else. So.
We're all doing the best we can. So Ms. Fry, your hand is up, your electronic hand. Go ahead.
Right. I was mentioned in their motion of, I guess, of limine 2, and as a public, citizen, this is really frustrating. So I don't, I can't write a response to that, right?
Trust me, I've said before, the Water Board tries to give all parties opportunities to participate in these hearings. I mean, clearly there are advantages that lawyers have from their training and experience, but we do the best we can to treat all parties equitably, and I certainly include you in the parties that need to be treated equitably. So we will do that. So I am sorry that I cannot rule on this now, but I need to read these both filings carefully. They're obviously important, and go forward at that point. And I will. So with that, we finally, I will say finally, we are now done with BlueTriton's presentation. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, for your testimony the last 2 days. We need to discuss how we are going to go forward. I have to wrap up at 4:30 today. That does give us 50 minutes to cover a few things, and we can decide how we want to proceed. One thing I do want to talk about is the site visit. As I mentioned at the 2:00 break, I had a conference call with some representatives of the Indian tribe, the San Manuel tribe of Mission Indians, which was very productive. They asked a lot of questions along the lines of where do we want to go? What do we want to do? And they emphasized, which I totally respect, the sacred nature of these lands to the Indian tribe. And obviously, we need to be very respectful of that. And I have confidence that all of you will be. And they asked some other questions about the process. They wanted a list of the parties who may be participating. And again, they can decide whether or not to grant our permission. And if they say to grant us permission to visit their property, and if they say no, we won't go. They did ask who would attend. I said I would send them a copy of our service list and that some or all of the people on the list may attend. And I also made it clear that I will not go unless they authorize everyone who is participating in this hearing to go too. Just the way I said that for the other parts of the site visit. I feel pretty strongly that all of you are obviously very interested in this proceeding and therefore should have rights to attend the site visit. So we're all going together or we're not going. The most important thing, though, that they asked me that I want to get back feedback from all of you on is where do we want to go? What do we want to see? So, and they said, can you give us a map? And I said, well, no, I can't give you a map because I don't have a map, but I can give you a list of the places that I want to see, and then they can tell us whether they agree. So the places I have written down, and I sort of did this in the order the water flows, because that's upstream to downstream, because that's just the easiest way for me to follow it. I would like to see the silo tanks, the meter on the pipe going into the silo tanks, and the discharge facilities that discharge from the silo tanks into what I believe is East Twin Creek at that point. I would like to see the turnout from the main pipeline that goes to the hotel and the meter on that pipeline. And I'd like to see the tank fill station, which my understanding is down closer to the highway where BlueTriton currently fills the tanker trucks that go to its bottling facilities. Those are the main facilities I would like to see. I explained to them that it's just part of my policy to do site visits. I like to be able to see the lay of the land. I never know exactly why or what I'm going to see until I see it, but that's why I wanted to do that. Aside from those facilities, I would like to see at least the outside of the old hotel building to get some sense of the historical area of use there. And if possible, I'd like to see the confluence of Coldwater Creek and Strawberry Creek that Mr. Lowe said could be important. So with that, first of all, does anybody have any other facilities or areas on the tribe property that they think the site visit should go to? And Ms. Fry, is your hand up to answer that question, or do you have something else you want to say?
I to answer that question, please.
Okay, where else?
I would like to see Coldwater Canyon.
All right, and I'll just tell you, there clearly was some sensitivity from the tribe for us just tromping around on all their property. These are sacred lands to them. So why do you want to see Coldwater Canyon?
Because that was the site of the first water bottling, where they were getting the water and where their first water take was. Okay.
Do you know if there are any facilities there?
No, but that's where the spring water flowed from, off the side of Arrowhead Mountain and Coldwater Canyon.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anywhere else that they think we need to see on this site visit? And again, just on the tribe property we're talking about here. All right, Mr. Lowe, your hand is up. And the tribe, yeah, there you go.
Yes, I'd like to second the Coldwater visit because there is still large, looks like 4-inch pipe coming out of Coldwater Canyon that I think goes to an old Forest Service permit that's right on the Forest Service boundary. So I think
Okay, all right. We don't need a lot of argument. It's on the list. Where else, if anywhere else, do you want to go on the site visit?
After all the things we've been talking about and looking at, the up on the highway right by the spring sites is an overlook on the highway that has a beautiful view of Strawberry Creek, East Strawberry Creek, Coldwater Canyon, all from that overlook. It's called Red Rock Wall. It'd be a wonderful place.
All right, Mr. Lowe, do we need tribe permission for that, or can we just do that?
No. That's just something after listening would be a great spot. That's where we take everybody to show them the project.
Okay. We will put that on the list. That's fine with me. I just want to know whether there's anywhere else we need to ask the tribe permission for. And Ms. Fry, your hand is up again. Either that or you didn't take it down.
No, I had another idea, and maybe Mr. Lowe can contribute to this, but where Strawberry Creek is, I understand it's right next on the edge of that property. Is that right? Or are we going to see where, or that's the confluence? Is that what we're looking at there? Is that, you already have that on the list?
I do have the confluence on the list. I don't know, maybe Mr. Lowe or Ms. Fry, just one of you know, is that something we can drive close to and then walk to look at?
Yes,
I've
can you
only
hear me?
been once. Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, that's a place that we can drive to and be able to see Coldwater. We actually park right on the edge of Coldwater, and then we walk down probably 200 yards, maybe 100 yards, and we get to the confluence. So it's a real short walk, but it's real good to see. We've been talking about Coldwater and Strawberry now for 4 days. So
okay, we'll see what they say. Again, there clearly are some sensitivities to having 20 people tromping around on their sacred properties.
right, this is an area that they always allowed us before when Campus Crusade owned the property. That's where we took all the tours, was to that spot. There's good parking, and so.
Okay, we will see. All right, I'm going to prepare a letter to them, and when I send it to them, I will include everybody on the service list on that letter, so you know what it's going to summarize what I talked about today. Again, as I say, I'm normally sensitive about ex-parte communications. I did not think there was any other way to do this. I didn't really think they would be willing to have a conversation with me and all of you on the line. And I thought it was important to have this conversation so I could try to make arrangements for the site visit. But I will try to summarize what was discussed in my letter so I have disclosure of that. So I will do that depending on how much time I have. Try to get to that tomorrow depending on how far we go. So Mr. Bilecki, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I'm wondering if you have in mind a particular format during each of these site visit days relative to who will be speaking, what kind of questions will be allowed, and the general nature of explanations on site for those individuals who have specific knowledge about the respective sites that we'll be visiting.
Okay, well, that's a good question. And we should probably talk about it now. Now is as good of a time as any. I know you all feel very strongly about your views about the issues in this matter. And I certainly understand that and I respect that. I also know that a site visit is not the time for you to all tell me all your views on every issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, we won't have time. Number two, we can't make a good record the way we can during a proceeding like this. So as I said before, I really want the site visit discussions, at least with me. I mean, you can say whatever you want with each other, and I hope you're all friendly with one another. I suspect you will be. You're all professional. But for the conversations with me and my staff, Mr. Woldridge and Mr. Anderson, I want it to be limited to describing what we are seeing. Basically, talk that we have to make on site that we can't make somewhere else. So pointing out things. And to keep it to that, we are going to try to record it at each stop as well as we can to try to have a record. But it's going to, logistically, it's a little hard, particularly if there are compact sites and a lot of people. So with that, who are the people who need to be, I'll just say, the tour guides? And I'm not trying to show favoritism here, but based on what I've heard, my feeling is Mr. Lawrence should take the lead on describing the BlueTriton facilities because he has testified about them in detail for the last 2 days. And I'm sure, Mr. Lawrence, you will be willing to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So beyond that, though, I know Ms. Fry, Mr. Bilecki, and Mr. Lowe, that the three of you also have considerable experience in this area. And I'm certainly willing to have you, I'll say, point things out and describe things that we see on site if Mr. Lawrence doesn't point out something or describe something that you think is important. But again, I hope I'm being clear. That's what we want to do during the site visit. We don't want to talk about who did what in the past, about whether that was good or bad or anything like that. Just pointing out facilities that we are seeing. So with that, I guess I don't know that I need, well, I'll just ask, before I get to you, Ms. Fry, the three of you I know all have considerable experience with the area, and I certainly respect that and want the three of you to talk. Is there anyone else who really has any knowledge who would want to be a tour guide or make descriptions beyond that?
Me.
All right, Miss McGuire, I'm going to come to you in just a minute, Ms. Fry. Mr. McGuire, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Mr. Lilly, I would like to suggest that Mark Nichols attend this tour, who is a consultant for BlueTriton, but he's also the gentleman who has run all the studies with respect to the flows at the tunnels and at the boreholes. So I think he would be a good source of technical information for you.
Okay, and that's just the sort of thing I think I don't want to hear, because that's the sort of thing we can do during a hearing. But I have no problem with Mr. Nichols attending. And if he thinks there's something that Mr. Lawrence has not pointed out that should be pointed out, that's fine. But the exact sort of thing I do not want to get into is, well, we did 3 years of technical studies at this site, and here's what we found. Because we'll be there all day if we do that. And that you can call him as a rebuttal witness, and he can testify at the hearing about that. So I'm not trying to be rude here, but with that caveat, if he has additional things he wants to point out in the field, that would be fine. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, Mr. Lilly.
All right, so Ms. Fry, your hand is up. Go ahead.
I would suggest that Gary Ernie, if he is available, is an excellent person to go. I don't, it depends on his schedule.
And who is he?
He he's a retired U.S. forester, and he's very familiar with the area. I have one other question.
Wait. Let me.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to invite him, you may, but let me just suggest I said it before and I'm going to say it again. All I want is for people to be able to point out what's in the field. And between the 4 or 5 people we already have identified, I think everyone's going to be able to point out everything we want to see. So I don't know that Mr. Ernie is necessary. I mean, there are only so many people who can say, yeah, that's tunnel number 2. There's the opening to tunnel number 2. So let's keep that in mind and going forward. I mean, I don't want to have to put a lid on this, but I want to get through this site visit in our allotted time and not cover things that we can just as well cover during the hearing. And I guess I'll say in that regard, the other thing is unless, and I know it's particularly all of you attorneys, you're all trained to ask questions and probe witnesses and all those things, but I'm really going to want you to limit yourselves from asking questions of our tour guides while we're out there for the same reasons. I mean, you're all advocates, you're all very good advocates. I've been impressed with all of your skills, but this is not the time for advocacy. This is the time to see things. So with that, Mr. Petrozelli, your hand, I think, was up first. Go ahead.
I was going to say that Mr. Vasquez will be attending the site visit. He was he did the site visit previously, so he may be pointing out certain features at each site.
Okay. And I understand that, and he definitely testified in this hearing and showed significant familiarity with the site. So again, that's okay, but I'm going to say it again. I'm going to have to limit people so we can get through this in 2 days. All right, Ms. McGuire, your hand is up. Is it still up, or did you just raise it again? And you're on mute, so you got to click around here. All right, your hand is down. Okay, go ahead.
I do not wish to speak. That was an oversight on my part. My apologies.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to try to sort all this out and first get the letter off to the tribe to see whether, and I don't know whether or not they'll give us permission. And they also said they have to go to their tribal council, which meets every 2 weeks. So they may or may not get back to us before January 27th. And if they don't, I think I still want to go forward with the other 3 half-day parts of our site visit. So we'll see whether or not we go to see the tribe land, and if so, whether we do it on the 27th or go back on a different day. It's certainly a bit of a pain for those of us who live in the Sacramento area to get down there, but we can if we have to. So with that is my plan for going forward with the site visit and the letter to the tribe. I do want to talk about how to proceed tomorrow, how I plan to proceed tomorrow. Oh, Mr. Lawrence, your hand is up. Okay, go ahead.
I try not to do that, Mr. Lilly, but I do want to just let everybody know that the helicopter company will need some personal information ahead of the flights. I don't know how you'd like to approach or proceed with that. I'm happy to give you the contact information for the helicopter company if necessary, or I can do it for you.
I'd rather, since I'm trying to avoid my ex parte context, I'd rather you ask them what info they need. This is always a fun thing, I think, when they ask how much everybody weighs,
right?
Which some of us are more inclined to disclose or not disclose than others, but I understand they need to know. So we're going to just have to all fess up and at least tell them our weights. And also, I did mention I would like whatever safety protocols they have seriously about that. And if they have any liability waivers that they require, I need to have that. So if you can assemble all that and send it to me, of course, with CCs to everyone on the service list, or have one of your attorneys send it to me, that's fine. And then we'll incorporate that into our site visit packet. And incidentally, I told the tribe the same thing. They said, what about liability waivers? And I sort of gave it back to them and said, well, whatever you require, we'll follow, but you have to tell us what you require. Okay. I'm still trying to find out from the State Water Board. As far as I know, we don't require any waivers, but if we do, I'll let you know. Certainly we'll give you all a warning that you can get hurt out there. I've heard enough about this terrain to know you can get hurt in a variety of ways, and hopefully none of us will, but I certainly want to warn everybody of that. Okay, so I think we've covered the site visit pretty well for now. I do want to press ahead. I'd like to get this done if we can. Frankly, after 4 days of hearing, it has reaffirmed I really do want to see the site. I think I know a lot. I know a lot more now than I did 4 days ago, but I'm sure there'll still be some useful things to see. So I think it's a little late to start new witnesses or new cases being presented today. Tomorrow morning, I think I'll start with Mr. Bilecki, and then go to Mr. Lowe and Mr. Serrano, and have each of you basically confirm that the testimony is in fact, the written proposed testimony is in fact your testimony, and then give a brief summary of it if you need to. I don't think it needs to be long. I have read each of your testimonies in detail. And then, of course, we'll allow cross-examination and so forth and admission of exhibits. I don't know how long that will take, but I'm sure it'll take a while. So Ms. Grady, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Before we move forward tomorrow, I think the motion in limine that we filed is relevant to determining the scope of what we'll be discussing. And in addition to that, I'd like to raise a second motion, which I would like to do orally right now, if you'll permit.
Okay, let me just clarify. I think your motion in limine did it concern anything submitted by Mr. Bilecki, Mr. Lowe, or Mr. Serrano?
Yes.
Okay, I will read that over and be prepared on that as well for tomorrow. So thank you for alerting me to that. And what is your current concern, or you said motion or a motion?
So in addition to the points raised in the motion in limine, we would like to move to object on the following grounds to all of the exhibits and information that is submitted following specifically the completion of the April 2021 report of investigation and draft CDO. And specifically, the basis is that, the prosecution team conducted a 6-year investigation. The public was invited to participate throughout that investigation and certainly can and did provide information to the prosecution team and the enforcement division during that investigation. And the public is also invited to participate in these hearings, and BTB has not objected to the interested parties participating. We know and appreciate the importance of their voices in this process. But it is critical to keep in mind that this action itself is fairly narrow. The question presented to you is BTB collecting water in Strawberry Canyon that is subject to Water Control Board's permitting authority under Division 2 of the Water Code? The prosecution team, acting on behalf of the state of California, is seeking to enforce a draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton brands. In support of the draft CDO, the prosecution team issued a 2021 report of investigation. The 2021 report of investigation and draft CDO are essentially the state's charging documents in this matter. The report of an investigation details the law and the facts upon which the prosecution team is seeking to impose the CDO against BlueTriton brands. And now the participants in this action, who've actively participated in the prosecution's 6-year investigation, are seeking to provide testimony as well as new information and new legal theories, it appears, that they did not provide the enforcement division before it issued the report of investigation and draft CDO on April 23rd, 2021, in which the enforcement division did not consider in preparing those documents. Section 11513C of the Administrative Procedures Act allows for the hearing officer to admit information that is relevant and the sort of evidence upon which reasonable persons are accustomed to rely in the conduct of serious affairs. These words have meaning. At a minimum, it requires that the evidence is relevant only if it was before the prosecuting agency when it issued the accusation or the charging document. Here, the new information, documents, testimony, and arguments that the participants seek to admit were not in front of the prosecution team when they issued the report of investigation and the draft CDO, which is the subject of this hearing. This new information is not relevant and it is not the sort of evidence responsible persons are accustomed to relying upon in the conduct of serious affairs, such as this proceeding. This information was not considered by the prosecution team or the enforcement division in the preparation of the report of investigation and CDO. And we request that the hearing officer consider this concern also in the context of the proposed site visit and the communications with the Division of Water Rights. Based on a review of the written testimony as we've been able to complete thus far, and we note that our time has been limited and constrained by the length of the proceedings each day, without the break that we anticipated, it appears that the new information presented by participants to this proceeding are being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted in the documents they are seeking to admit into evidence. It appears that the information is being offered to demonstrate additional information that would either bolster or alter the outcome of this matter against BlueTriton brands. The parties submitting the information do not offer other evidence that corroborates these documents based on our initial review thus far. Government Code 11507 should be considered for guidance in this process, as it addresses the concept of an amended accusation. Generally, it speaks to the fact that if an amended or supplemental accusation issued by an agency is issued, the parties should be notified of that filing. And if these amended or supplemental accusations present new charges, the agency has to afford the respondent a reasonable opportunity to prepare their defense to those new charges. If the information that SOS, Ms. Fry, or Mr. Rowe are seeking to have the hearing officer consider is relevant to the charging document and the focus of this proceeding, the prosecution team, and would lead to a different charging document essentially, the prosecution team should consider that and make a decision if it should withdraw its current allegations in this case and issue an amended charging document and provide opportunity for BlueTriton brands to respond. As of right now, the prosecution team has made its allegation and its case detailing the findings. To the extent the additional parties are providing new and different information, and to the extent they're seeking to provide detail that either contradicts or seeks a different outcome, that information is not relevant. It's not the sort of evidence upon which reasonable persons are accustomed to rely in the conduct of serious affairs, such as the evaluation of the enforcement documents that are the subject of this action, which address individual water rights. If this is allowed to continue, it would allow the public participants to act essentially as private attorneys general, for which there is no statutory or regulatory basis. Ultimately, allowing the prosecution team to proceed on new information without proper notice and opportunity for BlueTriton brands to defend itself against these new allegations, or allowing the public participants to act as private attorneys general without basis in law would result in a violation of BlueTriton brands' due process rights. Finally, proceeding in this fashion is also contrary to the Administrative Bill of Rights, which requires that an agency's adjudicative function be separated from the investigative, prosecutorial, and advocacy functions. And for that, I would like to reference Government Code section 11425.0, subsection A4. This also disregards the division of responsibilities that is the purpose of the creation of the Administrative Hearing Office itself. Water Code section 1110A defines the role of the Administrative Hearings Office as an independent organizational unit, consistent with the role of the Administrative Hearing Office as a neutral, fair, and efficient forum for adjudications. Subsection C provides that the Administrative Hearing Office's role is to conduct adjudicative hearings. Allowing the parties to continue to submit new information into this proceeding converts it from one of an adjudicative matter proceeding to the on the prosecution's charging documents to instead a continuation of the prosecution's 6-year investigation. As you explained to us, Mr. Lilly, there's at least a clear line between the prosecution team and the administrative hearing office. Allowing this forum, the hearing office, to be used to continue an investigation renders the separation of those two divisions meaningless. The foregoing that I've stated and fundamental fairness ultimately require that this proceeding must be limited to an adjudication of the charges presented by the prosecution team based on what they relied upon in the report of investigation and draft CDO. Therefore, because of this and because of the amount of time involved and the resources of all the parties, and we respect the time of the individuals participating as well, we would request that you issue a ruling on this in the motion in limine before we proceed, so that we could all understand what it is that we're proceeding upon. And we're certainly willing to provide a written brief on this to more fully explain before you proceed if you prefer. But due to time constraints, we wanted to bring this forward now.
All right, so Ms. Grady, it looks like you were reading something, and I don't think you need to rewrite it in the form of a brief, but I do think it would be useful for you to submit that to me tonight, or as soon as you can, and of course, copy all the other parties. And I will read that again. I was trying to take notes while you were talking. I did fairly well, but I'm sure I didn't get everything down. So I direct you to, if you want to follow up on this motion in writing, that you do so. And I'll just say to clean it up if you need to, but by 6 p.m. tonight, this evening, and then I'll read that and prepare a ruling in the morning. The one thing I did have a question on, you said something about the site visit. Are you suggesting that there's something improper with the AHO conducting a site visit in connection with this hearing?
Well, I think you've provided some information today that was quite helpful about limiting the nature of what is involved in the site visit. But I will note there is a concern that the prosecution team testified that they never visited, for example, and I'm in a misstate, I apologize, I think I'm running out of steam today. Well, the Spring 3 location. So it seems a little inconsistent for the prosecution team to have never visited site, instead ask us all to go there. But the biggest concern are really around the scope of testimony. And if the site visit is genuinely limited to only pointing out without any detail, and I admit I'm a little concerned that folks will have a hard time holding their tongue. There is some concern about the nature of what's being used for when we've invited about 20 people to go.
All right. Well, please submit your written materials. I will plan to rule orally tomorrow morning before we start other parties' presentations of their cases. And we will go from there. But everybody should be prepared to proceed with their cases. But I will make a ruling in the morning, first thing on that. So with that, Ms. Grady, I think you've covered this pretty well. What do you have now to say? Or do you? Your hand was up, it went down.
It is up, and thank you. I pulled it down when you called my name. The other issue is just back to the issue of logistics. I mean, quite bluntly, we were provided boxes of documents on December 17th. Between then and now has been brand new. It's loaded with lots of brand new information.
I've heard that one. I get the picture on that. You don't need to go into detail. What I've said is I plan to go forward, assuming that I deny your motion, which I now have heard, with Mr. Bilecki, Mr. Lowe, and Mr. Serrano, all three of whom exhibits are quite short and you can read. I have a problem with going forward with Story of Stuff and Ms. Fry tomorrow because I haven't had time to read all that. So I may allow them to put on their direct and to summarize their testimony, because I think that could be done, even if we haven't had time to read everything. But at this point, I do intend to give you and your colleagues more time before you are required to, before you're on the spot for doing your cross-examination of witnesses, and certainly before you have to state objections if you have to those exhibits. Because there were several hundred exhibits, and I understand the volume there. So just so we're here, I hope that it gives you at least some peace regarding that. We are going to have an additional day. Unfortunately, I don't know that we'll be able to schedule it anytime during the next 2 weeks between my schedule, a state holiday on Monday, and their site visit then the following week. But I do think that is appropriate, and I want to make sure I've read those materials so I'm prepared to talk about them. So I'll come back to you in a minute. I think I've got to give other people a chance to talk first. Mr. Lowe, your hand was up.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm kind of upset about what I heard from BlueTriton's attorney, in that from the very beginning, they've been trying to get rid of me, get rid of Amanda Fry, get rid of what we say, get rid of what we submit. Now saying basically that nobody should be in here but attorneys. But it's wrong. I mean, it's totally against everything I ever knew as a government employee. And and if we are going to accept that proposal that she's making, then I believe we and the other attorneys need time to really read and understand that and be able to comment on it, rather than just have you make a ruling in the morning, if that's possible. It's a big deal if you get rid of us or get rid of things that we've worked so hard to find. It's a big deal to us.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Lowe. That's why I asked Ms. Grady to circulate it to me, send it to me, and circulate to everyone else today. You may have to do a little nighttime work here, evening work anyway, but we will bring that up in the morning. Depending on how I'm inclined to rule, it may or may not be necessary for me to ask for responses. But if I'm inclined to grant the motion, I will give you and the other parties opportunities to respond. And you know, in fairness to you, you don't have to do it now. That wouldn't really be fair. I'd rather you take your time to review what they have written, and then you can respond in the morning. So thank you. Ms. Doty, your hand is up. I hope that addresses your concerns as well. I suspect you had similar concerns. You have to go off mute though, so we can hear you. Yeah.
I have similar concerns, but I also feel that you already made a decision on this. When the motion in limine was submitted by BlueTriton Brands on on Friday evening, we spent the weekend responding to it. And my recollection is that you had ruled that materials that were produced after April or whatever, the prior cutoff was February 9th, but the precise cutoff I didn't understand to be the issue. This is an evidentiary hearing in which evidence is being gathered. And I don't know what the point of that is if the record closed on February 9th or April 21st or whenever they're now asserting.
Okay, thank you. I am aware of how I ruled on Monday morning. That wasn't that long ago. I still do remember that. So thank you. And I will certainly consider that and look to see whether there's anything new that's been raised in this current motion or whether it's a repetition of what was previously argued. So I will consider that. And as I say, I will give you a chance to address it in the morning if necessary. This is a lot to digest, and I don't think it's really fair for me to ask you to respond right now. So please give that consideration, and as necessary, be prepared in the morning. So Ms. Fry, your hand is up.
Yes, this is a public hearing. We followed the deadlines given. And I will point out that BlueTriton, they've had a new owner. It's under new ownership since the 2021, right? So
okay, I understand. So I'll consider this in the morning more. Ms. Grady, I think we've beaten this one up about as well as we can for today. Is there some closing comment you'd like to make this afternoon before we sign off?
It's a slightly different issue.
Okay, go ahead.
The second issue I wanted to address is, well, I guess it's two. Mr. Lowe, you've indicated you would have proceed in the earlier group, let's call it, and Ms. Fry and Story of Stuff being in the second group. But we, upon having reviewed a little bit more, it looks like Mr. Lowe, even in his individual testimony, has included reference to some Story of Stuff exhibits. And so we would ask that he be grouped with Ms. Fry and Story of Stuff. And then the second point with that is something we haven't addressed, and it has to do with the fact that Mr. Lowe and Ms. Fry have submitted 2 sets of testimony each, which is unusual, one on their own behalf and then one purportedly on behalf of Story of Stuff. And we certainly don't have any objection to Ms. Doty as counsel, maybe assisting them in their presentation if we could lump it all together. And I think that might be helpful to all involved.
Okay, I will have to sort through those written materials. I did notice that. I'm not sure there's any prohibition on that, but let's try to sort through that. Well, it sounds like we have a lot to cover in the morning. Maybe we all have some homework assignments now. So we will read Miss Grady's written materials, which she's going to get to us. I said by 6 o'clock, I'll give you a chance to clean it up if you need to. It doesn't need to be fancy. Just put something on it that has the date and who wrote it so we know who it came from and what it is at the top. It doesn't need to be, in pleading form or anything like that. I think the record will be clear as long as you have the document in the record. I'm just trying to help you make it a little easier on time. But do include a service list. Thank you. And with that, I think unless anybody has anything they really need to talk about, I'm trying to wrap up here. Ms. Doty, something else you really need to talk about today?
I do. A proposal has been made to combine my material and to limit the evidence that I can use. So I would request that Story of Stuff not go tomorrow because I have no idea what to prepare for.
Okay, yeah, okay. That probably is going to make sense if I thought maybe you could, is there a problem with you just summarizing your direct testimony?
So the question is, so not calling our witnesses or?
Yes, having your witnesses summarize their direct testimony.
Well, there is, to the extent that, for example, Mr. Lowe is going to talk about the documents prepared by Mr. Rowe that Miss Grady inadvertently said Rowe instead of Lowe. So I assume those are the documents they're primarily concerned about. He had planned to talk about those in quite a great bit of detail.
Okay, I hear you. You're basically saying there may be objections, so we all need to prepare review the documents carefully before we start that. So I think that is making sense. All right, I think we're done. But Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. What do you need to talk about today? Go off mute, please, so we can hear you.
So, Mr. Lilly, you indicated that we may need, I think, after this week and potentially after the next 2 weeks to finish cases in chief.
I said after this week, after next week and the following week.
Yeah.
We may need another day.
Yeah, so I believe our deadline for submitting rebuttal testimony and exhibits is, I want to say January 28th.
Yes, I understand. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to submit rebuttal before we have finished our direct testimony.
Okay, that was my question. My question was whether this delay in finishing direct testimony would push back some of those.
Yeah, we'll have to amend those. That's
Okay.
only fair. Thank you.
And I want to emphasize that we couldn't have done this investigation and brought this enforcement action without the assistance of members of the public, and their participation here is very important. And they have every equal right to participate as much as the prosecution team and BlueTriton, and we must afford them those opportunities.
All right. Well, I do know that several of them filed complaints that initiated the entire process. So thank you. So Ms. Fry, is there something else for tonight that we need to cover? Your hand is up.
I just want, okay, since I seem to be in limbo here, am I supposed to prepare for tomorrow or what?
No.
Clarify.
I clearly said you will not need to put on your case tomorrow. Or I didn't
Okay.
clearly say that, but you're off the hook too. With Ms.
Okay.
Doty's request, your question as well. We won't ask either of you to put on your cases tomorrow. We're going to have to move those to another day. I will look at Mr. Lowe's separate testimony to see whether that needs to move to another day. I think Mr. Bilecki's testimony and Mr. Serrano's testimony are separate enough that we can cover those tomorrow. So both of you should be ready to go tomorrow if you can. Looks like we have a lot of free time tomorrow anyway, so we can cover that in the morning. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I realize there are strong feelings, and this is clearly very important to all of you. And I will do my best to sort through this, apply the law as I deem appropriate, and make a ruling that I believe is consistent with the law and is fair to all the parties. So with that, thank you. We'll all have some homework for tonight, and then I will see everybody tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly.